DreAllDay.com.
Now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get to use dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves all of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one framework, one package, one philosophy, one way of living, one approach, a book, and we got a daily masterclass that is called, that's what you're listening to right now, it is called Work on Your Game. All of these are called Work on Your Game. Welcome to the show. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and I appreciate you being here with me here today. You got a lot of options right there on that smartphone. So today's topic, we're going to talk to, this is targeted specifically at the athletes, but everybody should listen, but specifically to the athletes, how you can monetize your mind the same way that as an athlete you have already monetized your body, or at least we all get started, we all have that dream to monetize our bodies. How can you monetize your mind in the exact same way? That's the question that we are going to address, and I'm going to answer it here today. Now, before I go any further into explaining why we're talking about this topic, there may be some reasons that may be obvious to you and maybe not, but I'm going to make sure I explain it out so everybody knows where we're coming from here. Let me tell you that I have a text line where I want you to text me and tell me the most valuable insight that you got from today's masterclass, or anything that you learned here that really going to be useful to you, something that you're going to actually put into action. Maybe you're already putting it into action. Maybe you have a few challenges with it. Maybe something that you've heard or thought about or was doing before, but you've gotten away from or haven't really been thinking about, and now I've refreshed your memory. My number is 305-384-6894. You can send me a text to that number, 305-384-6894. And not only will you be able to engage with me through that text, you'll also be getting my daily motivation text messages, which I send out every single morning. So, and that number's down below in the show notes, just in case you missed it. So this episode is obviously targeted specifically to the athletes who either are right now, or you're about to, or you can see that you're going to be, or you already have transitioned from playing sports to doing something other than sports. And there are a few episodes in the archives of this show that I want you to check out. If you have not heard these episodes already, I want you to check these episodes out so that you can see some other things that I've talked about when we talk about that transitioning from the sports world to the non-sports world. Let's just call it the professional world, even though sports is a professional world as well, because someone like myself, I haven't played sports professionally for almost 10 years, but at the same time, about halfway through my career, I started doing things online to build what eventually became a brand. And this is what I started before we were even calling it having a brand. And getting into the influencer space, again, before we were using that phrase, and also before we were using the phrase social media, and then creating my own products and services, and then jumping fully into entrepreneurship as soon as my career ended. I kind of had a runway, because I had already started doing this stuff while I was still playing, because I just saw some opportunities there, and I was always into the internet and into computers even while I was playing sports. So for me, I had, I guess, some of the luck that I had that things didn't always work perfectly for me as far as professionally. I didn't always know when my next contract was going to come. Since that was the case, I started looking at other things that I could do to make sure I had some control and I had some say, that I could dictate where I was going just as an adult, regardless of what I was doing professionally. Because I was looking for those things in between basketball jobs, I started building what eventually became a business. So then while I kept playing basketball, when I got out, I already had some things in place. But not every athlete has that specific situation. Some of you athletes, and I'm going to get to those episodes in a second, but some of you athletes, maybe you are looking for the next thing before you even get to. Maybe you don't get to the professional level. Maybe you play ball in high school, and that's as far as your career goes. Maybe you play in college. Maybe you have a cup of coffee, as we say, in the pros. Maybe a year or two, and then you're already looking for your next thing. You're not even 25 years old yet. You're already looking for whatever that next thing is going to be. And maybe some of you play until you're 40 years old. You play sports all that time. But then even at age 40, you're still looking at another 50% of your life to live, hopefully, what are you going to do with that time? What are you going to do with the rest of your life? I doubt you wanted to spend the rest of your life saying that I used to play sports. I mean, about a year or two into that, you're probably going to be bored just talking about that. And you're still pretty, relatively young. So what are you going to do at that point? How can you monetize your mind now, since your body's probably not going to be your main money maker after the age of 40? Most of us, no matter what sport you had played, most of us are probably not in our primes anymore for sports. What can you do with that, and how can you maybe use what you learned in sports as a springboard to that next thing? That's what we're going to address here today. But let me give you, again, reference you to a few other masterclasses where I've talked about these things in the past so that you have a full picture here in addition to what I'm going to give you here today. So first of all, episodes 1748 and 1749, I gave you my hidden stash of business secrets that every athlete needs. Those are episodes 1748 and 1749. I just broke those up into 2 episodes talking about that same topic. Episode 505, I talked the mental transition from going from athlete to quote unquote real life. Even though being an athlete is real life, but it's a life that very few people ever get to live. So that's why I put real life in quotation marks. Episode 284 also, I talked about mastering the athlete to business transition. And a lot of people out there talk about mastering the athlete to business transition. And this masterclass, which I put out way back, and this is probably early 2017 when this one came out, this is not a new topic for me. This is something I've been talking about for a long time. It's something that a lot of athletes have asked me about, and I consult with and coach a lot of athletes on. Because the thing is that any of you who's not an athlete, I should have said this earlier, any of you who's not an athlete, you should still listen to this class, what I'm going to talk about here today, because you need to understand maybe where these athletes are coming from. So when and if you run into someone who is an athlete and they're kind of asking you, because maybe you're in a space that they want to get into and you can help them in that space, but you don't quite understand where they're coming from. You know where they want to go to because you're there already. That's why they're coming to you, but you don't know where they're coming from. These are some things that you can refer them to. You can refer them to these master classes. And by the way, you can listen to any one of these by going to workonyourgamepodcast.com. That's all one word. Workonyourgamepodcast.com is the website that has every episode in the history of the show all listed. You can listen to all of them right there on that page. And you can get a whole list of every episode we ever put out is all listed there. You can use the search function or the find function and find any episode based on keywords. Just use like I said, the find function in your browser, and you can find whatever episode you happen to be looking for. And the other thing is that athlete to business transition. Another thing that people have to understand is that many athletes coming out of the professional sports world don't want to go into what many of you who are listening, the world that you're in, where it's maybe 40 hours a week or 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week of working at an office building, or a certain amount of time that you're putting in consistently. And maybe you enjoy it, maybe you're somewhere in between enjoying it and hating it. But a lot of athletes aren't really conditioned to go into a world like that, because you have to understand the world that we're coming out of. We're coming out of a world where, this is something that I've said before, a long day for a professional athlete is probably 4 hours of work. That's a long day. Whereas a normal day for someone in a quote-unquote regular work situation, you're looking at an 8-hour day, right? That's a regular day is 8 hours, 8 to 5 with an hour for lunch in between. An athlete, we don't have 8-hour days. Or there's no 8-hour day for an athlete, at least not actually playing the sport and doing the thing. Maybe if you're traveling, maybe you're doing some type of community event or something like that, but you're not on the court or on the field or in the pool for 8 hours in a full day. Maybe in the off season, if you're training and you want to do 3 workouts in one day, maybe you're doing something like that. But most situations for most athletes in damn near every sport, there are no 8-hour days. Whereas an 8-hour day is just a normal everyday thing for everybody else who's in the professional world. And with that said, a lot of athletes might not be so keen on jumping from a 4-hour day into an 8-hour day. Right? Would you? You probably wouldn't either if you're used to being in a 4-hour day. And again, I'm just using these numbers as raw examples, but the idea is exactly accurate, that we don't have days that are that long, whereas again, it's a normal thing somewhere else. So athletes are kind of looking, what can I do to where I am contributing to society and it is worth something, so that they can get paid and make money and be somebody. But at the same time, maybe not go the such a traditional route in doing so. Is there a way to do that? Is there a balance that can be struck? The answers are yes and yes, and I'm going to give you some insight into what that is here in today's class. So let's get to it. Point number one. Topic, once again, is for athletes, how you can monetize your mind the same way you do your body. First thing you have to do as an athlete, you have to have the same expectations of post-sport success that you had in sport as for your in-sport success. You want to do something useful and be somebody outside of sports or after sports, then have the same expectations for yourself that you had when you were playing football or running track or playing basketball or wrestling or boxing. And we're going to get to what that means in a moment. Kobe Bryant, when he retired from basketball, he was doing a lot of storytelling through different platforms. He had some kind of podcast he was doing story books, he was doing things for female athletes, for youth athletes, and making a documentary series and movies and all kinds of things that he was planning on doing, that I read about him talking about doing when he first retired. And one thing that I heard Kobe say, or that I read Kobe say, that really stuck with me was that he said, if 20 years from now basketball and what I did for the LA Lakers is the greatest thing that I did, then that means I have failed. And the idea that Kobe was getting across was that he was holding himself to the same standards after sports that he had held himself to during sports. Now, Kobe is, even if you don't play basketball, you know who Kobe Bryant is. He's a legendary basketball player in the Hall of Fame and one of the greatest players, one of the top 20 players of all time, probably one of the top 15 basketball players of all time. And he wanted to surpass that with what he did outside of basketball. That's a pretty high expectation, pretty high bar that he was setting for himself. And how can any athlete do this? Even if you're not one of the top 15 athletes of all time in your sport, how can you achieve at the same level or a higher level outside of sports that you did inside of sports? Is this one word: expectations. And in order for you to reach that expectation, or even come close to matching the expectation you have for yourself, the first thing you have to do, the most important thing you must do, athlete, is you have to close the door on sports and know that there is another segment of life that you are now entering. You must close the door on sports. Kobe Bryant was able to do this. This is a guy who said at the beginning of his last season in the NBA, when it was clear that Kobe was no longer Kobe. He still had the name, but he didn't have the game anymore. Couldn't do it anymore. He said, I can do it, but I can't put my body through this anymore. He physically couldn't push himself to the level that he was used to. And because he was older, sports, as I just said, is a young person's game. He physically just couldn't perform at the level that he used to. Everybody could see that. Everybody knew that. Kobe knew it as well. He was at least admitting it verbally. And then he played his last season. He was ready to move on. So he was ready to jump full in on the next thing, which was going into his business storytelling empire that he was going to build outside of basketball after he was done playing sports. But he had closed that door on sports, and that's how he was able to move on to the next thing. You can contrast that with somebody like Michael Jordan. He retired from the Chicago Bulls for the second time, and most people thought the final time. He ended up coming back because the door wasn't quite closed just yet. He still felt like he had a little bit more that he wanted to do in that sport, so he wasn't able to fully move on to the next thing, which was being the executive businessman. Now, as the owner of the Charlotte Bobcats, it looks like, hopefully, we think Michael Jordan has moved on to the next thing. I don't think Michael Jordan's going to make another comeback and try to play in the NBA. But as he said during his Hall of Fame speech, never say never. But the point is, you got to be willing to close that door and know that there's another segment of life that you're entering that can be just as successful and just as fruitful and just as fulfilling for you as playing that sport was. And why did I use the word expectations is that you have to remember that your expectations will be reflected in your actions. When you expect something in your life, it will reflect in the things that you do. Now, if you say that you expect something, but you're not doing anything to match that expectation, then you don't really expect it. Maybe you have a wish, but it's not an expectation. If, like today in Miami, it's pretty bright outside right now, but we had some rain earlier today. If I expected it to rain and I'm on my way to work, or I know I'm going to be outside at some point, I'm probably going to carry an umbrella with me because my expectation of rain is going to be reflected in the action of carrying an umbrella so that I don't get wet. If you expect to be successful in playing a sport, for example, during the games, then you'll probably do some training, you'll do some preparation work so that you're ready to actually perform during the games when you get into a game situation. This is what I mean when I say expectations are reflected in your actions. So any athlete out there, if you're expecting to be successful after sports the same way that you were in sports or even more successful, then you have to take the actions that are setting you up to match that expectation. Take the actions that set you up for that success. You want to be a successful business person. Okay, what does a successful business person do? Maybe you don't know because you haven't been one yet. You're just trying to become one. But if you would just use your best judgment, they probably go get the information on how to do that business. They go get trained on how can I best perform on this job. They may go read some books. They may go find a mentor or find a coach. The same way that you did in sports, you got to do the exact same thing outside of the sports world. Remember, again, expectations equal actions. When you expect something, you will take action around it. So you will set yourself up for success by doing. Now let's move on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is athletes, how you can monetize your mind the same way you monetize your body. Number 2, bring the same discipline to your post-sports career that you brought to your sports career. And this is exactly what I mean when I say expectations are reflected in your actions. When you play a sport, if you do anything in that sport that would put you above most other athletes, such as playing your sport in college or playing your sport professionally, understanding that over 90% of athletes who play a sport never get to play in college, let alone do they play that sport professionally. So if you played in college, you've already catapulted yourself ahead of most people who play that sport. Athletes have a process. One process that we have as athletes is any sport you play, there's a training schedule, there's a practice schedule. And it's consistently you showing up and doing that work. Same way that a person who works in an office building or someone who's a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor, they go to work every day. You go to work every day by going to practice or going to do your training, whatever it's going to be. You have a coach, you have mentors. There's a schedule of when you show up, how long you're going to be there, showing up every single day. All of these things are part of the expectation. They're part of the package of being a successful athlete. There's no successful athlete out there who does not have a coach. No, zero. There is no successful athlete who doesn't have mentors, people who know the game better than them or maybe have been where they want to go or have experienced some things that that athlete is going to experience or is experiencing that they can learn from. There is no successful professional athlete who doesn't have a training schedule. There's no successful professional athlete who just shows up whenever they feel like showing up and still create success. None of those things have ever happened and they never will. You as an athlete became successful in sports through executing disciplines over and over and over again. Now, yes, of course, talent factors into it. Maybe there's some random luck that worked in your favor or maybe against you, but it's executing the disciplines that made you great because you cannot become great without consistency. That's just a principle of life. So the disciplines are what most people, athlete or not, most people suck at disciplines. And this is why most people don't attain the level of success that their talent and opportunities may suggest that they're capable of. And those disciplines then, because of this, they become your competitive advantage. The competitive advantage that separates you from your competition is the fact that you are willing and able to execute on the disciplines. And why is that a competitive advantage? Because executing on disciplines is boring, it's monotonous, it can be the same thing over and over again, it's not really that exciting, it's not really highlight reel worthy. And that's why it's your competitive advantage, because other people just don't want to do it. It's not that they're not aware of it. It's not that it's a secret. It's just that people don't want to do it. People don't like doing things that are so unexciting. Being excited is part of the equation of success in life, but also doing things that are not exciting is part of the equation as well. So that's the dichotomy that a lot of people don't quite understand. So some people just go so far as to only do one, but they don't understand the value of the other. So you need both. Okay, so now I'm telling you that you need both in life, and that is your competitive advantage, is being willing to do those boring, monotonous, tedious things, or maybe something that is exciting, but when you do it over and over again every day for 3 years, then it's not as exciting as it used to be. But being willing to stick to those disciplines and show up all the way anyway, that's the very idea of the third day. The decision that separates the pros from the amateurs, the decision to show up even when it's not exciting anymore, the newness is worn off, the novelty is gone, and you realize, okay, there's real work that still needs to be done here, and I'm responsible for doing it. If you can show up all the way in that situation, that's when you become a true pro. And this, again, applies in sports, same way it applies at work. And it applies at work the same way it applies in sports. If you want to win in business the same way you did in sports, athlete, the equation is very simple. You do the same work. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go lift weights for 2 hours a day if you're going to become a lawyer. That's not what I mean when I say the same work. I mean, take the same principles that you apply to going to the gym and lifting as an athlete that you're going to apply to going to the library or reading documentation or catching up with or connecting with people who can be mentors of yours and coaches of yours in your professional life. You need to apply the same principles that you did before to the work. Respect that you're starting a new career. And as such, you are the new guy or the new girl. So you have to pay your dues and earn your way up and into the game, just like anybody else would do in any other job. The same way that you had to do as an athlete. When you first come in the game as an athlete, whether you're first joining a college team or you signed your first professional contract, you probably had to work your way in some ways. Even if you're the best player on the team from day one, you still had to earn the trust. You had to earn the liking and earn the know, like, and trust of the people who are in your organization. Maybe those are your teammates. Maybe in the business world, it'll be your colleagues or your co-workers or your bosses or your subordinates or whatever it's going to be. But you have to earn that by showing up every day and putting the time in. I mean, simple as that. There's no magic trick to this. Your athletic background can help you grab some attention, but understand you will still need substance to stay in the game. Being a former athlete will help people. It will help you to be able to get a minute or two of somebody else's time and attention because they hear where you come from, and because it's so unique, it's something that so few people get to do. People be willing to listen to you for a minute or two just to see what you have to say. But understand, if you can't fill that minute or two with some substance, people are going to tune you out. So your athletic career, that whole 10, 20 years of athletic career will buy you about 2 minutes of time with someone who does not really care that much about what you did in sports. It'll buy you 2 minutes of time that other people can't buy. So it's not that it's useless. It is valuable, but you only got about 2 minutes. 2 minutes is not that long of a time to tell somebody what value you bring to the table. So you need to be clear on what it is. What value do you bring to the table? And the fact that you played a sport is probably not the value in itself because, first of all, there are other people who play sports. And second of all, the fact that you play sports has nothing of value for the person who is not playing sports right now. So what can you give them? This is a job. This is your job to figure out what is that thing going to be. So athletes, for example, when we're playing our sports, we hire trainers and go to trainers and we will study film and look at ourselves and figure out how we can get better, how we can improve our technique. Business people, they hire coaches to do what? They will join masterminds, they'll read books, and get the information. They're looking to get the knowledge, get the insights, take something that they think they know and maybe have it flipped upside down, take something that they're working on and have holes poked in it. Why? So they can improve themselves, improve their game, thusly improve their offering to their prospects. And the better their offering to the prospects, usually, hopefully, the better the prospects respond, the more money is made, and we live in a capitalistic society, so that can be the end right there. But you have to bring, again, this is the second point, bring the same discipline to your post-sports career that you brought to your in-sport career. You don't bring that discipline, your career won't last long outside of sports. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is for athletes, how to monetize your mind the same way that you monetize your body in sports. Number 3, leverage your past as an athlete to launch your future in the professional world. What I mean is, you want to make use of your sports experience for the next thing that you're going to be doing. Or you can use it, but one way that you can use it is as let's just say a personal trainer for your sport. Now, there are some other skills you need to add, some ancillary skills you're going to need to add when it comes to training that you don't learn in just playing a sport, so that you're not a hack trainer. And when it comes to coaching, it's the same thing. There's some things you need to learn about coaching that as a player, you're not actually going to be taught unless you go out of your way to ask one of your coaches about certain things, and maybe that's the way that you started to learn. So those are just 2 ways you can do it. You can do something similar to what I did. You can take some aspects, some elements of what you learned in sports and turn them around and give those elements to people who are not athletes. Or you can take those same elements and work with people who are athletes. I know many people who work in the thought leadership world who who take the things that they learned from sports, whether they played or not, and they took the things they learned from observing and watching and being a fan of sports, and they now use those things in their own business. They use those in their own practice, and they just figure out their job is to extract. That's the whole job, is extract the value from the experience. So from my experience as an athlete, I extracted principles like discipline, confidence, mental toughness, and personal initiative, like I talk about at the top of every episode of the show. But you had to do the work of extracting that information. This is your job to figure things out. What from my experience can I utilize now that I don't play sports anymore, that I can still leverage the sports experience, but it's not all about sports? Because unless you plan on talking to an audience of athletes. Now, if your audience is going to be athletes, then you're good. You can just talk, that you can use the jargon, the same language and everything. You're just talking to people who are coming up behind you. That's not the exact route that I chose to take. I chose to take the route of taking what I learned in sports and utilizing it in the business world, and utilizing it in the professional world, and that works for me. But what may work for you is to stay in your sport. You can go from being a player to being a coach to being an executive. Maybe that'll be the path that you take, and it's all in the same sport. Nothing wrong with that. But just understand that your job, no matter what way you decide to go, no matter from where you come, you must leverage your experience in sports to move yourself forward. You can use sports to create connections that can lead to new worlds. So when you're a former athlete, especially when your athletic career is relatively recent, whenever you stop playing, being a former athlete is like a passport that can get you into rooms that other people wouldn't be able to get into so easily. A former athlete will be invited to an event that a non-former athlete is not going to be invited to, simply because you're a professional athlete and people want to know what it feels like to see one of you in person. So if you want to learn sales, for example, you want to learn finance, you want to do real estate, listen, a former athlete can get a conversation with someone who doesn't usually take calls from people that they don't know. So for example, if I was to go get a job at some type of sales company tomorrow, I would try to leverage the fact that I was a professional athlete to either break the ice. I'm probably not famous enough to use my name, that they're going to be like, Dre Baldwin, who is that? But I could use it to break the ice, talk about the fact that I was a pro athlete that probably, maybe, would interrupt me in my little spiel. And they would ask me some questions. Well, what about this? Or what about this? Or what place do you like the best? Or what about this thing? And what about this thing? And me answering those questions actually breaks the ice between me and that person, and it creates an opening for me to do whatever it is that I came there to do, which is probably sell something. Maybe it's just to build a relationship. But if you want to learn sales, finance, or do real estate, the former athlete will be able to get a conversation with someone who doesn't usually take calls from people that they don't know. That's the value of being a former athlete. But understand, the longer you've been out of the game, the more this advantage starts to cool off. So the value of being a former athlete expires at some point. All right, it doesn't last forever. So make sure you use it up while it is available to you. All that being said, let's recap today's class, which is for athletes, how you can monetize your mind the same way you monetized your body. This is targeted specifically to athletes who are or have transitioned from sports into something other than sports. Make sure you check episodes 1748 and 49, episode 505, and episode 284 for related material. Number 1, have the same expectations of success post-sports that you had in sports. Like Kobe said, 20 years from now, the greatest thing I did was play for the Lakers. That means I'm a failure. He was setting an expectation for himself to achieve the same way off the court that he did on the court. And remember, your expectations equal your actions. If you expect rain, you'll carry an umbrella. When you expect something in life, you will take action around it. So set yourself up for success by, point number 2, bring the same discipline to your post-sports career that you brought to your in-sport career. In sports, you had a process, you had a coach, you had mentors, you had a schedule. You were showing up every single day and doing the work. You became successful because you were executing on the disciplines. And the disciplines are what most people, athletes and non-athletes, suck at. And thusly, discipline is your competitive advantage. That's why I wrote the book, The Third Day. It's all about the discipline of showing up every single day and doing the work. That is what can separate you from many other people. So you'll have to, then, even though knowing that will separate you, also respect the fact that you're starting a new career. You're a new guy or a new girl. So like any other job, you got to pay your dues and you must earn your way up, earn your way to respect, just like anyone else does at a job. Your athletic background can help grab some attention, but you still must have some substance to stay in the game. Point number 3, leverage your past to launch your future. You can use your sports experience to figure out what the next thing is going to be, such as there are plenty of trainers, coaches, and people like myself in the thought leadership world who came from the sports world. All we did was look at our past, leverage and mine our past for some valuable nuggets, and then we figure out a way to package that and how we can offer it to the world in such a way that it's valuable enough that they're willing to pay for it. I mean, this is the way that all of us do business. So being a former athlete is a passport that can get you into rooms that other people wouldn't get into, and it can get calls, answered that otherwise would go ignored. So if you want to learn things like sales, finance, or real estate, a former athlete, you can get a conversation with someone who doesn't usually take calls from a person that they don't know. But this advantage cools off, again, the longer you've been out of the game. All right, so make sure you use this one as quickly as you possibly can. Send me a text message to tell me the best thing you got from today's class. My number is 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.